Hi, all. Thanks for joining. We will wait for a few minutes because I see people are still trickling in. I see a question. Yes, this only applies to consulting. Yes. Although this, I mean, if there are other roles where case interviews are being applied, then yes, I mean, this advice also applies to case interviews in general. I think we can start now, right? Let me introduce myself first. I'm Ashwin. I've been fortunate to have worked for more than 12 plus years in strategy consulting. I've been a manager at Bain and Company, worked in the Middle East office as well as in the US office. I've been a director with Deloitte too. I've been a strategy lead with Goldman Sachs. And most of my work in Goldman Sachs was in the strategy team in New York, right? Um, what I do now is I help young, ambitious professionals like yourself get into top tier consulting firms. So I founded MBB Prep, right, which helps um, ambitious professionals improve their case structuring, improve their case analysis, improve their overall case interview performance, as well as other consulting interview facets like fit interviews, as well as resume and cover letter optimization to help you get top tier consulting offers, right? Um, so let me go into the content of today, right? And let's start with answering this question, right? What is the structure, right? Because in my years of coaching, I've been coaching for 5 years, and I'm fortunate that I've done thousands of coaching sessions. I've helped almost 250 people get into top tier consulting firms like McKinsey, BCG, Bain, Kearney, Strategy, and right. So when I coach candidates, right, a lot of the candidates think that structure is nothing but a list of buckets and sub buckets to look at, right? Some are of the view that structure is a list of options that we need to share with the interviewer, right, or a list of answers that we need to share with the interviewer, right? So that is not right, right? There's a fundamental misunderstanding in terms of what a case structure is, right? So a case structure, right, simply put, tries to outline the key areas of investigation or the key areas of analysis that you will execute to efficiently answer the key question, So, so the way to think about it is a case structure is like a roadmap, right? It's like an analysis roadmap, right? It's a sequence of analysis steps or analytical steps that you will execute to answer the key question that the interviewer has provided you, or the key question the client has, right? So that is what a structure is, right? Now, before we go into structuring, so typically, I think all of you are familiar with the case interview construct. The problem statement is presented to you by the interviewer. And during that opening phase, right, there are some preconditions, right, for to enable you to structure the problem effectively, right? The first thing is that you need to listen actively when the prompt is being presented to you, right? So I typically tell my mentees that listen like your life depends on it, right? So listen very actively to everything that the interviewer is telling you, right? Take notes of the key information, key facts, right? And paraphrase and recap the information to the interviewer, right? This is important because if you have missed certain aspects within the case context, the interviewer can provide you, that context, right? And finally, confirm the key question, right? The key question is critical, right? Because we are going to be solving the key question, right, during the case discussion, right? So we need to align with the interviewer, confirm with the interviewer what is the key question that we're addressing, right? Once you have done this step, next we move on to clarifying the client objective, right? So always start with clarifying what is the objective of the client, right? Now, I like to differentiate between the conceptual objective and the operational metric, right? For example, if the objective is profit maximization, the operational metric is easy, right? It's primarily profit, which is nothing but revenue minus cost, right? But if the conceptual objective is something like improve customer satisfaction or enhance market positioning, it doesn't give us a clear indication about what is the operational metric that will be used to measure customer satisfaction. How does the client measure customer satisfaction, right? So these objectives are not very universally defined in terms of a metric. So therefore, you will need to ask the interviewer, is there an operational metric that we can use, right? And then we should also try to understand from the interviewer if the client has any specific target level or timeline of achievement, right? Once I've done this, once I've got a grasp of the client objective, then I move on to the case context, right? By case context, I mean questions which help me get a better understanding of the client's unique context and situation, right? The first thing being, what kind of a business does this client run, right? How does he operate, right? What are his key revenue sources? What are his key customer segments, right? Getting a grasp of this business is important before you start drafting an appropriate framework, right? Also important to do clarify any unclear terms that you do not understand, right? For example, if the case is about sustainability and the interviewer has thrown terms like carbon credits, right? And so it's important that you ask the interviewer, if you're not familiar, in terms of how carbon credits or what carbon credits are and how are they calculated in this context, right? So always use the interviewer as a collaborative problem solving partner, right? Because case interviews are not there to test your knowledge, right? Case interviews are an instrument to test how you think, right? So focus on thinking and problem solving, not on demonstrating knowledge, right? And finally, clarify the problem scope, right? A very good example is if it's a revenue growth problem, the problem is help us grow revenue, right? I like to clarify with the interviewer if the client is okay to look at diversification, right? Looking at new business lines, right? Or is he open to also inorganic growth, for example, acquisitions or strategic partnerships, right? And I ask this because if the interviewer tells me that the client is not open to diversification, is not open to inorganic growth options, I can eliminate those areas of analysis, right, in the beginning itself, right? So it helps me narrow down the scope, right? So before you structure or before you take time to draft an appropriate framework, these are the key preconditions, right? Listen actively, recap, align with the interviewer what is the key question, clarify the client objective, right? Not only the conceptual objective, but also what is the operational metric that is used to measure that objective, what is the target value, what is the timeline of achievement, and also the case context and situation, right? In terms of how does the client operate, clarify any unclear business terms, clarify and try to scope down the problem statement, right? Again, if there are any questions, feel free to put it in the chat window. I keep intermittently seeing the chat window. If there are any questions that come up, I'm happy to answer, right? And the way I have structured this session is there is a bit of theory, maybe only one more slide of, or few more slides of theory, but then we go into drills, right? So I want to make it as interactive as possible. So there are a lot of drills that we will be doing as part of this session, right? Now, let me talk about characteristics of an above the bar structure, right? Many of my mentees, right, that I coach are unclear of what is an above the bar structure and what is a below an ineffective structure, right? Now, I think there are four key pillars, right, in terms of an effective structure, right? One is it should be objective driven, right? So always start with the key question, right? The structure that you lay out should answer the key question, right? The way to think about it is that if I execute all the analysis that I'm articulating in my structure logic, I will be answering the key question that the interviewer has told me or the client wants me to address, right? So always start with the key question, right? Then the second is when you break down the problem statement, right? So first, always disaggregate the problem statement into sub questions, right? So we follow a top down logical thinking, right, while breaking down the problem statement, right? And the best way to disaggregate, right, is being messy, right? So when you're messy, and you use the messy principle to disaggregate, there is no overlap between the elements, right? And you're comprehensively covering all the analysis areas, right? So therefore, try to be as messy as possible, right? Try to be mutually exclusive, because then there is no analysis overlap. You're not duplicating any analysis, right? Also, you're covering all the key aspects of the problem, right? The third thing is customized, right? And this is the most critical, right? So most candidates, what I see is that um, they have a generic framework, right, that they memorize, and a lot of them apply the same framework to every case question, right? And I think one of the most popular frameworks is the customer, competitors, yeah, and company itself, and some other buckets, right? And this is a generic framework that they apply to any case situation, right? Now, customization is very important here, right? Because the interviewer, when he's assessing your structure, right, he's looking at whether this particular structure is tailored to this problem that I've provided, right? And a very good way to customize is when you're disaggregating, right? For example, if it's a revenue growth problem and I'm talking about a streaming company, let's say, right? Rather than disaggregating by, let's say, volume and price, right? I can disaggregate using the business context, right? Which for a streaming company, it's primarily the number of subscribers and revenue per subscriber, right? So I'm using the business context to disaggregate, right? So that is a very good way of customizing your case structure, right? And finally, you will need to be hypothesis driven. So you will need to embed hypothesis in your structure. You don't need to articulate a separate hypothesis, right, when you are formulating your structure, but you could embed them in your structure. So what I mean by that is, for example, right, rather than saying I want to analyze the features or the product features, right? Instead of saying just that, I want to analyze product features. If I say something like, I want to assess if my product features are tailored to the needs of my target customer segment. Now, the second thing that I've just highlighted to you, right, the second statement is much more hypothesis driven, right? Because there is a clear hypothesis to test now, right? Whether the features of the new product that I'm launching, is it does it align with the needs of the target segment, right? So there's a clear hypothesis to test. The first statement, which I said, that is, I want to analyze product features, there is no clear hypothesis there to test, right? Now, in order to make it more tangible, let me give you an example, right here, right? Let's take a simple case prompt. Let's say you're currently working with a mid-sized consulting firm, and recently you've received a job offer from a rival consulting firm, and you're considering whether or not to accept this job offer, right? So how would you evaluate this decision, right? And as I explained, the first thing you do is clarify, right? So here, let's assume you clarify the objective, right? And you ask the interviewer, what is the goal of this job change? Is it career growth? Is it work-life balance? Is it financial improvement, right? And let's assume the interviewer tells us that he wants you to balance all the interests, which is career, work life, and financial, right? Now, let me take a pause here, right? And I want you to put in the chat window uh, um, any uh, um, any structure logic that you think, right, is applicable, right? Or how would you structure this particular case prompt, right? So I think there was a question here from Valentino. Can you rephrase, please, about the client objective not being clear as profit, for example, right? So what I meant, I think somebody has already clarified it, but what I meant here is, if the objective is vague, such as improve customer satisfaction or improve market positioning, right? Then for these objectives, the operational metric is not universally defined, right? So each company might measure customer satisfaction differently, right? So therefore, we will need to align with the interviewer also. How do we measure customer satisfaction, right? Yeah. So I think there are some answers that people are sharing, right? So that's great to know. And we will be doing more drills like this, right? So I will keep responding as I see more chats coming in, right? But let me take you through how would I structure this particular problem statement, right? So first, look at the key question. The key question is, um, should we accept or should we change the job, or should we accept this new job offer? That's the key question, right? So always start with the key question, right? The key question here is, should I take up the new job offer, right? So when you start with the key question at the top, you're automatically being objective driven, right? Then what I would do is that disaggregate this key question into what are the sub questions that need to be answered in order to answer the key question, right? So here, for example, a very good way to disaggregate this key question would be to say that if this new job is better for my career, better for my personal life, better for me financially, and then if I can manage the potential risks, then I should take up the job offer, right? So if you think about it, I've broken down the key question into the key criteria that need to be met for me to take up the job offer, right? And if you see, these are completely messy, right? So career related aspect is different from personal aspect, is different from financial, right? Again, in a case structuring or typically in case interviews, you can never be 100% easy, and that's not the intention also, right? But what we should aim towards is, we should aim towards minimizing overlap between the aspects, between the disaggregated elements, and we should aim to be comprehensive, right? We should consider all the aspects that need to be considered in order to answer this key question, right? And then what I would do is further disaggregate. So in order to answer this first level sub question, what are those second level sub questions that I need to answer, right? So for example, in order to answer if this job is better for my career, right? The sub questions would be: does it offer better growth opportunities? From a long-term perspective, does it align to my long-term career goals? Will I learn new skills, right? And I can do the same for personal life, right? I can disaggregate into what are the relevant sub questions, right, that I need to answer. Some of the sub questions will be commute related. Some of the questions will be the work life balance or the culture of the company, right, in terms of promoting work life balance, right? Now, financial assessment would entail looking at salary, but looking at other compensation components, for example, benefits, the pay progression that is expected in future, right? And finally, the potential risks, right? Is, for example, is this a startup? Is it stable, or is it a mature company which has good job security, right? So if you look at this structure now, right, it is objective driven, it is MECE, also it is customized, right? These are the sub questions that I've listed all pertain to the job offer decision, right? If I answer these sub questions, all of these sub questions are helping me or taking me closer to making the job offer decision, right? And finally, I've embedded hypothesis, right, in this framework, right? Because if you look at this, right, um, each of these questions that I've asked, right, there is a clear hypothesis to test, right? For example, from a benefits perspective, right, I can what I'm saying is that I will compare what benefits my current or a new job offer is providing versus my current job, right? So there is a clear hypothesis I'm testing, right? So this is an above the bar structure, right? And if you see, it doesn't utilize any memorized frameworks, right? It's simple, but what it utilizes is key principles, right? Which is, it is objective driven, it is MECE, there is no overlap, it's comprehensive in terms of the areas it's covering. It's customized. I cannot apply to any other problem statement except the job offer decision problem statement, right? And it's hypothesis driven, right? There are clear hypotheses that I will need to test, or clear questions I need to answer, or comparisons or analysis that I will need to conduct in order to answer the key question, right? Now, this is an about the bar structure example, right? Now, let's get into drills now, right? And some of you have mentioned cost benefit analysis, right? And some of you have also mentioned, I think somebody has provided a very detailed structure in line with what I just outlined, right? So that's great. So great. Thanks for sharing that, all of you. So let's move into structuring drills, right? So the way I want to run through these drills is, I will provide the case prompt, right? I will also provide some key clarifying questions, right, and answers that you might have asked. And then I want you to formulate a structure, right, for this case prompt. And then we will go into the solutions, right? Um, so let me start with the first drill, right? The first drill is culinary craft is a leading, sorry, is a leading online cooking education platform, right? They are popular among home cooks, right? And it's considering acquiring a smaller rival called Gourmet Guru, right? And Gourmet Guru specializes in niche, high-end cooking techniques and has a loyal following among aspiring professional chefs. So the key question is, should Culinary Craft go ahead with the acquisition, right? As we indicated, there might be some key clarifying questions we will ask. One, definitely we will ask, what is the objective, right? Is there a specific objective that the client has? Let's assume that the interviewer is giving us a clear criteria that the client wants to recover the investment cost within 5 years, right? So there's a clear payback period provided here. And the other question I would ask definitely here is about the business, right? So how do Culinary Craft and Gourmet Guru actually make money, right? What kind of customers are they targeting, right? So here, Let's assume that they make money through subscription fees for online courses, as well as they make money through premium content and live courses, right? In terms of segments, I think we already know that culinary craft mostly caters to home chefs, hobby chefs essentially, and gourmet guru is catering primarily to aspiring professional chefs, right? So let me go back to this case prompt, right? And what I want you to do is, in order to make it more interactive, would love if you take time and formulate a framework or a structure for this particular case prompt, and do share it in the chat window. Yeah, I think there's a question from Elliot. When developing a hypothesis, is it suitable to answer the main key question, or should it be per secondary question? Right now, the challenge with developing multiple hypotheses, although it will definitely help your analysis, is it will take a lot of time, right? And when it comes to structuring, you will the norm is typically 2 minutes, right? And so you will not have enough time to develop hypotheses for each of the analysis area, right? So what I would do is I would break down the problem, right, and talk about what are the key and I would talk about the key sub questions that I will need to answer, right? Would love if anybody would like to share in the chat window their structure, their case structure. Yeah, I think, yeah, Stanley, thanks for sharing. So I think you're talking about market size. You want to look at market, profit into 5 years less than investment cost. I think that's a very good way to put it, right? The financial aspect or the financial criteria, right? I like the revenue breakdown that you have done, user lifetime into average revenue per user per year. Variable cost, raw materials, utility staff, fixed cost, you've considered certain categories. And then you've talked about the risk of investment, right? Cannibalization, I assume you're saying post acquisition risks in terms of integration risks. So I think that's a very relevant structure, right? I think it's an above the bar structure. Of course, you're not getting the opportunity to verbalize here, right? But communication is also an important part. How do you phrase, this particular structure, and how do you verbalize it? But this is great, right? Thanks for sharing. So let me also share how I would think about breaking down or disaggregating this particular problem, right? So first, I would start with the key question, right? Always start with the key question, right? Then I would try to disaggregate into what are the key sub questions that I need to answer in order to answer the main question, right? Which is, should we acquire or not, right? And here the key sub questions would be: one, from a market attractiveness perspective, is the professional chef market that we are entering, right, through this acquisition, is it an attractive market, right? Will we recoup the investment cost within 5 years? Because that is the key financial objective that the client has in mind, right? Is it a strategic fit, right? Because we will need to consider the fit, because we're catering to two different customer segments. So we need to understand, is there alignment in terms of brand, right? And finally, do we have the capabilities, right? And can we, mitigate and manage the risks? Right now, if I disaggregate further, right, how would I assess a market attractiveness? I would look at size, growth, profitability, right? And I would also look at the competitive landscape, right, in terms of how can we differentiate against the competition, right? If we acquire gourmet group, right? So for example, if there are competitors, right, who have consolidated in a similar manner, right, so us making this acquisition, right, improves our unique selling proposition, right? Then I think the financial criteria, I think, I think some of you have also put it in the chat window. So I like the way you have articulated, right? But essentially, right, if you think about it, um, if we have to recover investment cost in 5 years, what that means is that the annual incremental profit that we will make, right, over the investment time frame over 5 years should exceed the investment cost, right? Now, annual incremental profit will be a function of how much standalone profit Gourmet Guru is making, right? And we can look at what will be the incremental standalone profit they will make in terms of incremental revenue through more customers or increase in price, or also optimization of the operating cost, right? Then we would look at the synergies, both revenue and cost synergies, right? Revenue synergies might come from cross-selling opportunities, right? Gourmet, so culinary craft selling its products or its courses to Gourmet Guru customers, and vice versa, right? So cross-selling provides a revenue synergy opportunity. Similarly, cost synergy opportunity can be provided by optimization related to, let's say, technology, optimization related to certain fixed cost elements, right? And then the investment cost, right, that we need to recoup would be the purchase price, but also the integration cost, right? The one time.
Told me that actually she was distraught that you had this 54%. But your
Please, if you can, somebody can go on mute. I think somebody is
my
speaking.
father he was directing our blood today, and my mom went to take my
Thank you. Thank you. Um, so then we would look at strategic fit, right? So in terms of strategic fit, I think what is key to look at is what is the complementarity in terms of product offering, right? Because a culinary craft at the same product as Gourmet Guru, they may not be in. Uh, uh, there is no benefit, right? But here, culinary crafts product proposition, if you see, it caters to more hobbies, while Gourmet Guru caters to more advanced, let's say, recipes, and caters to more professional chefs, right? So there is a bit of complementarity here, and there is so we'll have to also assess, is there brand synergy, right? For example, professional chefs, right? They might be pricing, or they are associated with Gourmet Guru because of the brand, in terms of the advanced cooking techniques that this platform provides, right? Now, when you merge, let's say, home cooking kind of courses and professional chef courses, right? Will Gourmet Guru's customer base still stay on, right? That's a question we will need to ask, right? And finally, the capabilities and risks, right? Capabilities primarily here would be the cultural fit, right? The technology integration capabilities. Also, we'll have to assess the risks in terms of, let's say, market risk in terms of, let's say, if there are demand fluctuations, what does that mean for our annual incremental profit projections, right? If there are operational risk in terms of when the synergies will be realized, right? Or if the synergy realization gets delayed because of operational challenges, right? The financial criteria, right, may not be met, right? Now, here I'm just explaining the entire structure, but of course, when you have to verbalize, right, you have to verbalize in maybe 2 to 3 minutes, right? And if the interviewer gives you some question, maybe you go deeper on a specific area, right? So the verbalization would be more shorter, more concise, right? But I'm trying to explain the logic right here in terms of how I would structure this particular case prompt, right? Do put in any questions that you might have in the chat window, right? And if I intermittently, as I said, I will keep looking at the chat window. If there are any questions, happy to take up those questions and answer those questions, right? But a lot of you are also sharing your structure, so that's great, right? And I see some very detailed and very thought through structures, right? I think somebody's asking, is there a general way of looking at acquisitions? If the question is this, right, should I acquire this company? Yes, I mean, you could say some of these elements might apply, right? But what you will need to be conscious about is firms have become smarter in terms of tweaking the case questions, right? For example, I was coaching a mentee, and he had an interview with an MBB firm, and the interviewer asked him that the client is planning to acquire another company. I don't want you to look at the financial aspect. I want you to look at it from a purely strategic aspect. Does it make sense, right? So there are different ways you can ask an M&A question, right? So you will need to focus on what is the question being asked, and then look to disaggregate, right? um, Now let's me go to the next prompt, right? This is an interesting prompt. It's primarily related to profitability, right? So your client, Serene Stays, is a boutique hotel chain operating in the US. They are the third largest player in their market, holding 12% of total market share by room nights. Now, despite strong revenue growth of 6% year over year, their margins are low, right? So your task is to identify why Serene Stays is less profitable and suggest ways to boost their margins to match those of their competitors. Right. Again, let me run through some clarifying questions to ask over here. Right. So first thing you would ask definitely is, clarify what is the objective. Right. From the case context, we already know that the client would like to assess, why their profit margins are lower. Right. So I would clarify this with the interviewer. Right. That this is what we need to do. Right. Assess why profit is lower and suggest ways to improve profit margin, right? And I would also ask, what is their profit margin, right? And how and what is that of the competition, right? So let's assume the interviewer tells us that our profit margin is 5% and the competition is at 15 to 20%, right? If you see the clarifying questions that I've asked, one thing I want to highlight here is that, when I coach a lot of mentees, right, because I tell them that you need to ask the objective. They ask a very generic question such as, what is the objective of the client, right, rather than using what has been already provided to them by the interviewer, right? Because in the case prompt, right, the interviewer has already told us that he wants us to assess why the profit margins are lower compared to competition and suggest measures to improve, right? So what I would do is, rather than asking a generic question like what is the objective of the client, I would use this information and verify it with the interviewer and align with the interviewer, right? Great. Let me go back to the case prompt now, right? So again, let's do the same exercise. Take few minutes, and formulate a structure. So I think, Swati, you've asked a question. Do we also need to be familiar with technical aspects like consideration or acquisition premium when dealing with M&A cases? So again, as I said in the beginning, right, case interviews are not a test of your knowledge, right? Case interviews are a test of your problem-solving abilities, right? So they are not looking at you having specific technical expertise in a functional or a sector, right? They are more interested in how you use general business oriented concepts and solve problems, right? So I would not go into technical aspects of M&A. Yeah, I think Noor has. I think for the earlier case prompt, you put a question. You can also ask if we can enter the market ourselves. I think that's a very good question to ask, right? Yes, that is one consideration you can also have in the structure, right? That if we want to enter the professional chef market, right, or this particular segment of the market, um, is the acquisition route the best way to do it, or can we do it organically? All right, so that's a good consideration to include. I will include it in the next workshop. Um, yeah, I think Noor is saying, should understand first if, Noor is essentially saying you should disaggregate profit and would verify if it's a revenue or cost problem. Yeah. So I think, yeah, that's the first level of disaggregation to do. Yeah, I think that's the right approach to take here. Right. I think Mary is sharing. Maybe they don't have a strong market presence or specific niche, right? Maybe we do a competitive analysis. Okay. Okay. Okay, so some interesting points here, right? Um, and let me wait for a few more seconds before I go into taking you through my solution. Yeah. So let me. I think Dishita is sharing competitive landscape. Look at costs, internal if there is an issue, right? Yeah, so I think some good ideas and some good ways to disaggregate, right? Um, so let me walk you through how I would start this, or how I would structure this particular prompt, right? So first, as I said, always start with the core question, right? And here, I think there is some information that we can use, right, and make the core question more specific or more useful here, right? For example, I would say something like, why Serene stays profit margin at 5%, right, lower than competition, right? And how can we improve the margins, right? So there are two questions here, right? So first is the diagnosis, essentially, why is our profit margin low, right, compared to competition, right? And how do we improve the margins, right? So just another thing to note here is that when I give this drill to my mentees as well as in coaching sessions, right, um, many people think that when it comes to profitability diagnostic, right, it's all about historical comparison, right? So they need to compare what is the current value versus what is the historical value, right? But that's not true, right? You can run a diagnostic in multiple ways, right? It could be definitely historical comparison. So if my profit has declined, so we diagnose why the decline has happened, right? But also it can be comparison with the competition, right? So here we are comparing our let's say revenues with the competition revenue, um, and we need to assume a similar sized competitor, right? Or we normalize the revenues, right, for certain rooms, for example, and then we see where the relative underperformance is happening, right? For example, here at the start, I would disaggregate profit, right? At the highest level, you can disaggregate it into revenue and cost, right? And then compare with the competition, right? To see where there is relative underperformance, right? If the relative underperformance is on cost, I would drill down further on cost, right? And I will continue the drill down till I find the granular numerical issue or the quantitative problem driver, right? Once I find the quantitative problem driver, I would ask some qualitative questions, and investigate and identify what is the underlying reason, right? Why this negative development of this quantitative problem driver has happened in the first place, right? And once I understand the underlying reason, right, then I move to measures and strategies to address this underlying reason, right? Now let me in order to make it more tangible, right, let me visualize it a bit for you, right? How would I run this analysis with the interviewer, right? So what I would do is that first I would start with disaggregating profit at the highest level, revenue and cost, compare it with competition and see where there is higher relative underperformance, right? So if the higher relative underperformance is in cost, I would drill down further in cost. I would disaggregate, let's say cost here could be disaggregated into labor, utilities, rent, F&B. There could be other categories, right? But then I would identify among these cost segments, where there is highest relative underperformance against competition, right? So if labor provides me the highest relative underperformance, labor cost that is, then I would drill down further into labor cost and see if the underperformance is due to us having more number of staff, or us paying more salaries for staff, right? Or our average staff cost is higher, right? And let's assume it's actually because we have more staff compared to competition, right? So if you see, because of this drill down now, I have a clear quantitative problem driver. I have isolated this problem driver, right? Once I isolate this problem driver, then what I do is that I ask qualitative questions, right? Why do we have more labor staff or more staff than the competition, right? And some of the reasons I would investigate are maybe lack of streamlining of operations, lack of automation, lack of training of staff. Maybe we don't track the performance of staff. Maybe we don't hire skilled staff, right? Or maybe the competition is outsourcing more operations while we do everything in house, right? There could be multiple reasons why we have more staff, right? And then if I identify, let's say automation is the key underlying reason, right? Based on the qualitative investigation that I've done, right? And this is a process of elimination that you will run, right? Qualitatively asking certain questions to the interviewer, right? And that will happen in a client setting also, right? You will qualitatively try to eliminate what could be the underlying reason, right? And once you understand the underlying reason, then you come up with measures and strategies to address this underlying reason, right? So for example, if lack of automation is the underlying reason, right? The measure or the strategy to adopt could be you invest in technology to automate repetitive tasks. You invest in process optimization. You could also do other things, right? For example, in order to overcompensate the lack of automation, maybe you can cross-train your employees, right? So that the same staff, right, is doing multiple tasks, right? And therefore you need less staff, right? Let me take a pause here. I think there are some questions coming up in the chat window, right? And if there are any questions that you have, please, do put it in the chat window, right? I hope this explanation that I gave, this logic that I provided to you, right? Some of you were able to get it, right? But let me quickly summarize this logic, right? What I'm doing here is I start with disaggregation, right? Because the first step that I need to do is diagnose why our profits is lower compared to competition, right? So in order to diagnose, what I do is that I disaggregate at the highest level profit into revenue and cost, compare it against the competition figures, right? And see where there is more relative underperformance, right? And then I drill down further, right? I do the same exercise. I compare against competition, right? And I see which segment, for example, which cost segment has more relative underperformance. And then I drill down further there, right? Till I isolate a quantitative problem driver, right? Then what I do is that I ask qualitative questions to understand why this quantitative problem driver has become negative, or why has this negative development happened, right? For example, here, why is our labor staff higher compared to competition, right? And we investigate all these different qualitative reasons, and we come to a qualitative actual reason, which is automation, lack of automation, right? And then once we understand this underlying reason, then we move into measures and strategies to address this underlying reason, right? So here, to address lack of automation, we might, let's say, invest in technology. We might do or invest in process optimization. We might also invest in employee cross training, right? Great. I hope this was clear, right? I think there are some questions that have come up. Do we have to go through the sub segments of each cost segment, right? There is no clear thumb rule as to how much granular you need to go, right? But what I would do is that I would at least go 2 or 3 levels deep, right? Because then it kind of gives me a more granular quantitative problem driver. Of course, in a case interview scenario, you don't have a lot of time, right? So you will need to, maybe you will have time to maybe go deeper at least 2 or 3 levels only, right? um, right? And so I hope that answers your question also, Mary. Just 2 to 3 levels deep, right? Um, so I think Elliot is asking for this question: do we have to go into the quantitative specifics? We are trying to catch up to the 15% profit. So do we need to go to staff salary level and do calculations to make up that 15% profit? Yeah, that's a very good question, Elliot. Yes, if you have to reach that particular target, you will need to. But what I would do is that first identify and isolate the quantitative problem driver, investigate the underlying reason, and then when I'm coming up with measures, right, when I'm brainstorming measures and strategies to uplift, or in this case, for example, to reduce cost, right, because we've identified this cost segment to be causing the relative underperformance, then I would consider, right, into how much, to what level we need to reduce cost, right? And if we have to achieve 15% profit margin, we might need to also look at revenue enhancement initiatives. Although revenue may not be the problem here, but we will need to overcompensate in order to achieve the profit margin if costs cannot be reduced, as much as we would like to, right? Um, do we, I think Mary's asking, do we input the cost analysis of tech automations and show that comparative to labor cost? Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, yeah, you're right. I think we'll have to see what is the labor saving if we pursue automation, right? There might be a one-time investment cost, but that is one time, right? And every year, annually, you might get a cost saving, right? So um, so I think that helps. I hope that helps, Mary, right? I think Dishita is asking, do we have any tips or suggestions on how to start structuring answers in such a straightforward way? I mean, this is the start, Dishita. I think this workshop, I think I'm trying to explain the approach that I typically coach my mentees around, right? But in a way, right, if you become more, let's say, objective driven, right, and you focus on logical breakdowns rather than memorized frameworks, your structures tend to become more robust and more effective, right? Now let me also go into the next prompt that I have for you, right? So a client is Fresh Threads, right? It's a mid-sized clothing retailer with 30 stores in the US Northwest, known for trendy, affordable fashion, right? They recently acquired a textile printing facility and need to choose between two setups, right? So there is the high volume, cost-effective standardized printing, a flexible, lower volume, customizable printing with higher costs, right? The CEO is seeking guidance on which setup to implement. How would you approach this decision, right? And of course, we start with clarifying questions. We ask first, what is the objective? The client, let's assume the interviewer tells us the objective is to maximize profitability, and the client doesn't have any specific profit target, right? What I would also ask here is that because there are two setups here, right? One is the standardized printing, and the other is the customizable printing, right? I would also ask, is there a difference in fixed cost, right? Or is it only a variable cost impact, right? So here, let's assume the interviewer has told us that only the variable unit cost is impacted, right? So we don't need to worry about the fixed cost impact, essentially, right? Let me go back to the case prompt, right? Again, the same exercise. Take some time, right? And try to formulate an appropriate case structure. So I think there are some questions. Let me answer them as I continue here. All right. So I think, Andre, you're asking, in other business cases, should we give weights to each one of the sub questions so we can propose prioritized solutions? Yeah. Um, yes, I think if you can give a weightage, right, that adds to the specificity. However, again, you will need to be conscious of how much time will that take, right, and you will need to prioritize, right. So I would prioritize certain sub questions, right, and then use them for prioritizing the solutions, right. So Abdul is sharing his, I think, take into account what customers need and maintain quality. Yeah. So that's one consideration. Yes. Right. I think before there was some questions. Isaac had a question. Do you have tips on how to manage staff headcount in case you need to automate? Right. Um, so staff, I mean, if you are able to achieve automation, right, and if there are redundancies in headcount, the only option is you can actually give severance and let people go, right. So that actually has an annual cost saving for you, right. And that's something which most organizations do, by the way, right. I think Swarna is asking, is it possible for the low volume printing to be more cost effective? Yeah. So I mean, it more likely not, right? Because here the case prompt is telling us that low volume customizable printing has higher costs, right? This is what the case prompt is telling us, right? I mean, there could be a situation where this is possible, but the case prompt is indicating to us that the customizable printing option is higher cost. Yeah, I think some very interesting thoughts here, right? I think some of you are sharing what will customers prefer? Will they prefer more high end or something that's more standardized and affordable, right? E- so I think yes, profit is the primary focus. This is what we ran through the clarifying questions, and profit is the main objective. Yes, right. Um, so let me run through one way, right? I'm not saying this is the only way, right? This is one way to think about this particular problem statement, right? And the way to differentiate this particular problem statement here is um, this is more, I would say, an operational decision, right? For example, a decision like should we acquire a new company, should we enter a new market, is a more strategic question, right? So a strategic question, you start with the core question and you break down what are the key criteria that need to be met to answer the core question, right? And when you break down, right, the criteria, one of the criteria could be market attractiveness, the other criteria could be the financial assessment, other criteria could be capabilities, and they could be risks, and they could be other specific criteria to include, right? For example, in the culinary craft case, we had a strategic fit as one of the criteria too, right? Now here in this kind of a problem statement, right, because it's a operational decision, right, so I would focus more on the financial assessment, right, and I would focus here more on also on gross profits, right, because if you think about it, right, the case form tells us that there is no fixed cost impact, so all we care about is variable cost and revenue, right, so therefore we care about gross profits, right. So what I will do, or the way to think about it is, what is the customer demand, right? Which approach, standardized or customized, maximizes our revenue, right? In a standardized setup, there is higher volume but lower average selling price, right? Customized setup, there is lower volume but premium ASP, right? But if the number of customers that opt for standardized clothing, right, is not as high, right, as required, right, because the ASP is lower, right, then we may not generate enough revenues from standardized option, right. So we'll have to compare which option gives us more revenues from a customer demand perspective, right. and then contrast that or compare that with the variable cost impact, right? Because variable cost impact, we're looking at lower variable cost from a standardized setup because there's more automation and there's less skilled labor, and higher variable cost in a customized setup, right? So we will need to get the actual variable cost numbers for customized option, variable cost numbers for standardized option. What is the customer demand for standardized versus customized to assess which setup gives us the highest gross profits, right? So the over indexing will happen on the financial assessment, right? Then there are other considerations, right? Once the financial assessment is done, right? The other considerations being, for example, in standardization option, right? If there is customer demand, let's say if there is very high customer demand, but if our capacity doesn't allow us to leverage that volume potential, right? Then standardization option is not feasible, right? Similarly, for a customization option, right, if we cannot manage the operational complexity, right, or maybe the quality control that is required for in order to deliver the quality product to the customer, right? So in that case, even though financial assessment is in favor of customization option, still we may not go with customization option because it's not operationally feasible for us, right? We cannot manage this higher level of operational complexity, right? The third thing to also look at is the strategic fit and risks, right? So fresh threads as a company, right? What is their brand perception, right? Are they looking to sell higher volume products with lower selling price, right? Or are they more premium brand, right? Who would like to be known for customized clothing, right? So what is the, so we'll have to look at what is the current brand perception, right? And where future expansion, future growth is coming from, right? Are users gravitating more towards standardized options in future, right? And that, if that is where the growth is, maybe we'll have to look at that more closely. Or are they gravitating more towards customized clothing, right? And finally, the market risks and operational risks to consider here, right? Because we might go with one option, right? But what happens if the demand for that particular option goes down in future years, right? How will that impact our business, right? Operational risks being how easy it is for us to, let's say, implement one option versus the other, right? Now, this is not the only way to structure this particular problem statement. Some of you have put really good ideas in the chat window, right? And some of you talked about the customer demand, right? Option to look at, right? To understand which option customers are preferring and then go or explore that particular option more, right? Great. So I think let me do one more case prompt here, right? Just to engage more, right? And then we can stop for questions, right? This particular case prompt is about pricing, right? So a client is a leading consumer electronics manufacturer. They're planning to launch its first noise cancelling headphone product, right? The product is Smart Sound Pro, right? It will be a premium headphone with advanced noise cancellation technology and high battery life, right? So the question is, how should we price Smart Sound Pro headphones, right? Uh, to summarize, a leading consumer electronics manufacturer launching their first noise cancelling headphone. It's called Smart Sound Pro, right? It's a premium headphone with advanced noise cancellation and high battery life, right? The question is, how should we price these headphones, right? Again, we run through key clarifying questions. We start with the objective, right? What is the objective, right? Is it to maximize profits? Is it to gain market share, right? And is there a target profit level, right? So here the interviewer is telling us there is no specific profit target, right? He's telling us that the maximizing the profitability is the key objective for the client while maintaining its brand image, right? And we also clarify the primary target customers, right? So let's assume that the interviewer tells us that the target customers are high-end tech enthusiasts or professionals seeking superior noise cancellation for work, right? Let me go back to the case prompt, right? Maybe this time you will have less time to structure because I want to go into the solution a bit faster this time. But please do share in the chat window, right? Happy to answer any questions that come up meanwhile. Yeah, I think Elliot, good question. Would you? I think you've asked me. Would you recommend writing out notes in the actual interview that you have laid out, or should we practice formulating this in our head and bring the interviewer through it verbally? Right. I think it's a very good question. Right, and I often face these questions in my coaching sessions. Right. Um, in 2 minutes, right, it might be difficult for you to write it down, right? So if you opt to write down everything that you want to convey or verbalize to the interviewer, right, then you will take more time, right, than 2 or 3 minutes, right? So what I typically advise is you don't need to write down everything, right, but you can notate or denote, what you want to say, right? For example, I would just say market size, competition, growth, and then verbalize it, that something like, I want to look at how attractive this market is in terms of how large is it growing, who are the competitors, do we have a unique selling proposition compared to the competition. Essentially, what the hypothesis that I'm testing here is that, is it a large growing market with less competitive intensity, right? Yeah. Swati, I think, yeah. So, I mean, I was waiting for this answer, right? And you've shared this answer. Thanks a lot for that. So, cost-based pricing, value-based pricing, and competitive-based pricing, right? So thanks for sharing. And we will talk about these three constructs that you have shared, right? And often, right? So when I give this drill to a lot of my, people I coach, um, the the instinctive answer tends to be these three constructs, right? Cost-based pricing, competitor-based pricing, and value-based pricing, right? But what I want to go into here is, how do you use those constructs effectively, right? Because a lot of people don't use that effectively, right? Yeah, I think Stanley, I think you put it very nicely, right? High bound, low bound, and then competition. I think that's a very good way to do this, right? Great. So I think some very good answers, some very good ideas, right? So let me talk about how I would approach this particular pricing problem, right? As I said, a lot of candidates tend to talk about cost-based pricing, competitor-based pricing, and value-based pricing, right? And they tend to talk about these different pricing strategies as distinct ways to price the product, right? But that's not accurate, right? So when you are thinking about pricing a product, you would consider multiple aspects, right? And the first aspect I would consider is, what is my cost of production, right? My cost of production is, in a way, is my price flow, right? And I would consider here what all goes into this production, right? Is it materials, manufacturing, packaging and distribution, marketing and sales cost, right? For example, right? Then what I would do is that I would consider the customer's maximum willingness to pay, right? So here, when I say maximum willingness to pay, right, we're looking at what is the perceived value or enjoyment that the customer derives from using the product, right? I say enjoyment because it's a consumer product, right? So somebody who's using this noise cancellation headphone, right, there's a perceived enjoyment that is deriving out of it, right? And maybe we can get this perceived value, through focus groups, through customer surveys, through certain market research, right? Now, this at the top is my upper bound, right, or the price ceiling, right? Then what we need to look at is, what are the substitutes, right, or what are the competition, or what are the competitive products here, right? And we will compare, does our product, right, add additional value compared to best alternative, right? So if you take the best alternative product in the market, right, is our product having better features than that particular product? If yes, then we would price our product higher than the alternative. If not, we would need to price it lower than the alternative, right? Now, where to price it, either at the upper bound or the lower bound, right? Or or how do we compare it with the competition, depends also on the client objective, right? And our client objective is to maximize profitability, right? Which means our pricing will need to be closer to the ceiling, right, or the upper bound or the maximum willingness to pay of the customer, right? If the objective were to penetrate the market and gain market share quickly, then perhaps a pricing would have been closer to the lower bound, right? Or at least at a level that allows us to gain market share quickly, right? Now, this is a better way, right, to think about this particular pricing question as to how would I price this particular product, right? Rather than going with three strategies, distinct ways of pricing, right? Yeah. So I think Swarna, you're asking how is value-based pricing, then how do we quantify the value, right? So I think that's a good question, right? It is difficult, and what most at least consumer product companies would do is that they would do a lot of focus groups, customer surveys, market research to quantify a particular value, right? There would be certain surveys wherein they would ask two products, two different features. Ask users to say how much they would pay for one feature versus the other, and then they will derive a value through that, right? But um, I have seen pricing cases, given at let's say McKinsey or MBB interviews, right, wherein one example I can give is uh, a particular medical product, right, that was provided to hospitals, right. The value for the hospital is um, how much they would save in future litigation cost if they implemented that medical, tracking product, right? Because that particular medical tracking product would improve their effectiveness of their operations, right? Major operations, right? And therefore, it minimizes future lawsuits and litigations, right? So there are ways you can derive how much value a particular product is adding, right? But that will need to be contrasted also or compared also with the alternatives or substitutes, right? Um, yeah. So I think. So I think Noor is asking, isn't it important to consider the market if there are certain main players that could have a monopoly, or if it's a perfectly competitive market, right? I wouldn't, I mean, because the context is about a consumer electronics company, right? Um, it is less likely that this would be these kind of market situations, right? It's mostly for a consumer product, at least in a developed economy, which we will be mostly dealing with. You would not face these kind of situations, right? But yes, if the question is about a regulated entity or a utility company, yes, they could be these factors that you might have to go into, right? Yeah, Dishita, I answered this question, right? Which is, um, I mean, for a consumer product, there could be surveys, there could be focus groups conducted to understand what is the perceived value, right, for a particular product, right? Great. So I think I've taken a lot of your time, right? But happy to actually take some questions, more questions that you might have, right? I actually had more drills, but we did not have time to go through all the drills, right? But I covered the key drills, right? And what I did here is, if you look at the questions that I covered, the first question, which was an M&A question, was more of a strategic decision question, right? And the strategic decision question is, pertains to the financial assessment criteria, but also what are the other aspects, right, that we need to consider for this merger to make sense, right? And that aspects being, is this market an attractive market, right? Because when you are merging with a company in a different market, you're in a way entering that market too, right? So is it an attractive market, right? And as well as a strategic fit, right? Is there product complementarity in terms of the merging of the two product lines? That's something that you would also consider, right? The second case was more diagnostic, right? If you see in a diagnostic case, we went top down, right? We started at the top profit and we started disaggregating. Everywhere else we're going bottom up, right? And that's the beauty of diagnostic cases, right? You start top down in the diagnostic case, right? And you identify where the problem is, and then you go into solutioning, right? And that's very important to do in a diagnostic case, right? Unless you know where the problem is, it's difficult for you to come up with targeted solutions, right? And finally, the other thing that we did was the fresh threads case, right? This was more about over indexing on the financial criteria, right? And trying to understand which option is more financially viable for us, right? And then only then we compare the operational feasibility and the risks and strategic fit, right? And finally, the pricing, we looked at, what does it really mean when we say cost based, value based, and competitive based pricing, right? I think there are a lot of questions, and let me take some of these questions, right, one by one, right? I think Swati, you're asking what's the best strategy to familiarize ourselves with industry-specific terms or metrics while solving cases, right? So I think the best way to do that is use the interviewer, right? It is not practical for you to read about every industry, right? Um, I think what you will need to become better at is how do you use the interviewer, right? For example, um, you know, um, what I typically advise is when you get a problem statement and the problem statement is about, let's say, revenue increase or about diagnosing something, right? Always try to get a view on how does the client segment his business, right? So rather than asking a closed-ended question such as what are the product lines, what are the customer segments, I would ask the question such as what is the logical way that the client segments his business in order to manage it? For example, does he segment by product? Does he segment by geography? Right? Because then once I get that information, I would also get certain financial metrics according to segmentation, right? Mohammed, yes, I think we will be sharing the link for the recording. Yes, we will be doing that. I think, Alexi, you're asking if you had to identify five most common case studies. I mean, typically, yes, M&A, market entry, profitability diagnostic, these tend to be common, right? But as I said, firms are becoming better and better at giving more complex, non-traditional cases, right? Because if you think about it, right, and I was a manager at Bain, right, and I was responsible for interviewing people, right? I was looking I was looking for people who had a original way of thinking, right? Who were natural problem solvers, right? Who did not rely on memorized frameworks, right? Because if you think about it, right, once you join the firm, right, you cannot apply these memorized frameworks to solve client situations, right? Client situations are complex, they are nuanced. You will have to apply original thinking, right? So firms are testing your problem solving abilities, they're not testing your abilities to memorize frameworks, right? So that's very important. So you will need to build problem solving abilities, problem structuring, problem disaggregation abilities, right? um, I think there's some. How many clarifying questions should you ask? I think approximately. Yes, I think 2 to 3 clarifying questions is a good number to ask, right? But there is no specific number, right? Or there's no specific thumb rule that you need to adhere to, right? If the problem is really complex and really intricate, and you are not understanding, a lot of aspects about that problem, I would ask more questions, right? I think, Stanley, you're asking, what if my hypotheses are different from what the interviewer has prepared, right? So your structure, right, your approach, your framework that you verbalize initially to the interviewer is only a suggestion, right? Um, that does not mean that when you start the analysis, if the interviewer provides you more detail or asks you to take a different approach, you will not be adaptive, right? Or it will be held against you, right? So you don't need to be worried about what the interviewer has prepared, right? As long as you structure the problem in a logical way, right? As long as your structure is something where you have employed Macy principle, where you have customized it, where you have focused on what is the key question, where you have embedded certain hypothesis in your analysis framework, right? As long as you do that, I don't think you need to worry about whether your structure is effective or not. right? Um, so I think, Swarna, you're asking, can we see other drill cases to practice on our own pace? Yeah, I mean, I will share this. I will share this YouTube videos also, right? And of course, I can share some more, right? Um, and So Elliot, you're asking, for MBA experienced hires, does case interview questions differ for us than? Um, Ideally, no, actually, because at least in Bain and BCG and McKinsey, what I've seen is the cases don't change. It's just that the level of demonstration of skills, the expectation of skills is higher, right? So the problem solving ability that you need to demonstrate if you're in, let's say, joining at a consultant level at Bain versus an associate consultant level will need to be higher, right? Great. Somebody has asked how to be a professional interviewer, right? I mean, it's if before you start interviewing at Bain, for example, they do. You need to go through some sessions, right? They do kind of give you some tips and suggestions. And it's true for McKinsey, BCG. It's not true. At least I have not heard tier two consulting firms being so rigorous in terms of training their interviewers, though, right? Great, great. So I think we're out of time, right? But lovely talking to all of you, right? And it was a pleasure, and you were a great audience. It was interactive, and I got to learn as much I got to share. So lovely talking to you, all of you, and hope to stay in touch. And all the best for your upcoming interviews. Thank you.